Hi everybody, so in this video I'm going to be having a look at some software which you can install to help you on the IB Computer Science course. Now some of the software that we'll look at is required for the course, but some of it will just be software that I'm recommending either because I think it's going to help you on the course in terms of managing the day-to-day aspects of working with program code, or software which I recommend because I think it's really good to help you learn more about how computers work, and also maybe a little bit of software which I just think is cool, and I think everybody should have it on their computer. So the first thing I'm going to recommend, it goes into the second two categories really. It's not required for the IB course, but what I want to recommend is that you give Linux a try. So you may already know about Linux, but for people who don't, your computer's operating system is probably going to be either Mac OS, OS X if you're using a Mac, or Windows if you're using a PC. But Linux is another operating system. It's actually very widely used, but not so much used by home users. So the place where Linux gets used a lot is on web servers, or on small devices, so embedded devices, things like your network router. Also, Linux is the basis for software in a lot of other devices, or maybe I shouldn't say Linux, but the system which Linux is based on, Unix, is the basis for software in things like Android devices, and it also gets used, well actually it's the basis for Mac OS X as well. So learning Linux allows you to learn principles which are common to virtually every computer device. I guess the exception to that is Microsoft Windows devices. But even Windows is moving towards adopting some of the same standards which underlie Linux as well. So it's not required for the course, but it is definitely a very useful thing to know about. Now, if you are going to learn about Linux, obviously you don't want to lose your own operating system, the operating system installed on your computer. But there is a really convenient way that you can try out Linux without risking damaging your computer in any way, and that's to use VirtualBox. So I'm actually on a fresh Linux install inside a VirtualBox session now. VirtualBox is a program that allows you to create a virtual PC on your PC. So if I just do a quick search for it. Now it's free software. You can download it and install it onto a PC. I think there's probably a version for Mac as well. I haven't checked that, but I would expect so. Yes, there we are. So you can download VirtualBox and install it on your PC or Mac. And then once VirtualBox is installed, it gives you a very nice user interface where you can create a virtual PC. You can choose how much memory it has and things like that. Obviously, you can't give it more memory than you've got in your real PC. But you can set up a virtual PC, and then you can grab, for example, a Linux operating system. Again, they're all free. So if you have a look on DistroWatch, which is a website that lists Linux distributions, I think, well, MX Linux is at the top of the ranking at the moment. It's been there for a little while, but I would recommend Ubuntu if you're a user just starting off. Ubuntu is very easy to use. That's really its forte, is that it focuses on being easy to use for people beginning Linux. So what you could do is download VirtualBox, install that on your computer, use VirtualBox to create a virtual computer, download a version of Linux to your computer, and then use Linux to install, use VirtualBox to install Linux into a virtual hard disk on your computer. Once you've done that, you can basically boot into your normal operating system, so Windows or Mac OS X, and then start VirtualBox, and then just use Linux for the things that you want to do. So Another really nice thing is that it allows you to separate things out. You can have your normal operating system for tasks that you do at home when you're relaxing, and then you can have your VirtualBox computer for things that are connected to schoolwork, and that also gives you a little bit of separation between the two. I'm not going to install VirtualBox now because I'm in a VirtualBox session. So I think it is possible to install VirtualBox inside VirtualBox, but it gets a bit like that movie Inception. Yeah, I will not know what is real anymore. So, okay, that's my first recommendation. Okay, on to the next recommendation. So this is something that really is required for IB, and that is Java. So as you probably know, we study the Java module at IB, which means that it's the second exam paper that you have to sit. So getting Java on your computer is really important. Now, there are different distributions of Java. If I go onto the net and look for downloading Java, just skip past all the Polish links that I can't read. Okay, so this is Java SE, Standard Edition. And I'll just go in here. Okay, so this is SE14, which is, I think, the latest version. Now, what you want is not the runtime, but you want the JDK, okay, the Java Development Kit. So the runtime is for running other people's Java programs, but if you want to develop your own Java programs, you need more than that. So the first thing to do is to download the JDK. Now, you can download it from Oracle. It is free in the financial sense, so you don't have to pay for it. I sometimes think Oracle are trying to reverse that decision, but in any case, if I click through here, I've got links to versions for pretty much every operating system you would want to install Java on. Okay, so installing Java is the first step. Now, once you've installed Java on your machine, then you're going to want an IDE. So an IDE is an integrated development environment, which is basically like a really powerful text editor for editing Java programs. Now, to call it a text editor is probably underselling it or overselling it, depending on how you look at it. But the IDE that we use at school is called Eclipse. It's a free IDE. So after you've downloaded Java, the next step would be to download Eclipse. Let's see if I can get to the Eclipse website. The problem is it thinks I'm Polish, so it keeps suggesting Polish links. Here we are, Eclipse downloads, the Eclipse Foundation. So, okay, so now this takes me to Eclipse. Now, again, you almost certainly want 64-bit Eclipse, so download that to your computer. Now, I've already got Java installed, but I don't have Eclipse installed on this computer, so I'm going to click download here. And you will probably find that the Eclipse installation is a bit slow. It downloads a sort of an installer program first of all, and you might think, wow, that downloaded quickly, but actually you haven't downloaded the whole program, you've downloaded the installer. So then you've got the delights of downloading the whole program ahead of you, and it is quite slow, but persevere. Now, Eclipse isn't the only IDE for Java. There are other IDEs that you can use. Remember, IDE, Integrated Development Environment. So I actually think that the IntelliJ IDEA is a better IDE than Eclipse in a lot of ways, but that one is a commercial IDE, so there is a free version, but if you want to get all the features you need to pay money, and it isn't very cheap. So because of that, the school goes with Eclipse, and I think probably it is the right choice. Oh, I don't have a Java virtual machine. I was expecting it to be installed by default. Okay, so in that case, I'm going to install the Java virtual machine on my Linux installation. Can I remember my password? The problem is this is a VirtualBox and I might not have used my normal password. Oh, I know what it will be. Okay. So I'm just going to search for my Java development kit and install that. Okay, so I didn't realize that I didn't have Java installed. I thought that would have come with default, but there you can see that if you don't have Java installed, you need to install Java first before you install Eclipse, and then once you've installed Java, you can install Eclipse on your machine. Okay, so maybe I'll start Eclipse downloading in the background, and then while that's downloading, I'll talk about a few other things that you could set up to help you a bit with IB. So another of my recommendations for the IB course is to have a good version of Python on your computer. So it's true that in IB we don't really study Python as a language, but the IB does have a internal assessment, which is where you develop a program of your own. And you can do that with any language you like. So it could be Python, it could be Java. Sometimes students develop using JavaScript and other popular languages. So those are all fine. I think Python is a very useful language to have on your computer because compared to Java, although Python isn't as rigorous and it isn't as good for writing large programs, if you just want to write a small program which does a job quickly, then Python is a really great choice. And Python is also very good for prototyping. Now, prototyping is where you write a simple program to test out an idea before you write it in a more rigorous language. So if you're thinking about writing a Java program but you're not completely sure, then quite often a good idea is to write a minimal version of that program in Python first, test it out, and then when you're sure that it's working okay, you can have a go at writing it again, but this time in Java, and that will give you obviously better performance. So Java is a more efficient language than Python. That's one of the reasons we use it. And also Java for large programs tends to prevent errors more effectively than Python. So those are some of the advantages of Java. Okay, so Eclipse is starting now. It always seems to complain about the download progressing very slowly. I don't know how. I guess this must have been made by people in Silicon Valley who are used to really big pipes on their internet connections. But for those of us who don't have that luxury, it just constantly complains. But it is still installing. It's on the way. Okay. So in terms of installing Python, well, if you're using Linux, Python comes installed already. If you're using Windows or Mac, then you can get Python very easily from the Python website. So again, I just search for Python. Oh, my internet's really overloaded now. Now, when you download Python, it probably is going to come with IDLE, which is the Python IDE. Basically the text editor that you use to write Python programs. Now, IDLE is a very simple IDE. We do use it at GCSE, basically just so that students don't get confused with having a more powerful IDE. But if you are doing IB Computer Science, it might be worth getting a better IDE for Python. Now, there are a few different IDEs that you can use. Just to remind you, IDE is the Integrated Development Environment. That's basically the text editor, but it provides lots more features than just a normal text editor. Okay, so IDEs that you can use for Python, well, if you remember, I said that I really liked the JetBrains IntelliJ IDE for Java. That's not the one that we use at school, that's Eclipse, but I do quite like the JetBrains IDE for Java. And JetBrains also make an IDE for Python, which is called PyCharm. And that is mostly free. Again, you have to pay if you want the extra features. but it is a very good IDE for Python. If you're writing more complicated Python programs, then this is definitely something to try out. If you want to go with something which is completely free, then another option, there's a Python IDE called Eric. So Eric IDE. And this is also, it's maybe not as good as PyCharm, but it's I think it's pretty good. I mean, I shouldn't even say it's not as good as PyCharm because I haven't really used it that much. But yeah, I think it's pretty good. So if you're looking for a completely free IDE, then that could be a good option. Okay, so Eclipse has mostly installed now. I have to basically say that I'm going to accept everything. And I think we're approaching the end of the installation. Installation completed successfully. Okay, great. So let's click on Launch and let's open up Eclipse. Okay, it's not super fast, but probably my virtual computer is also being overwhelmed a bit because of the screen recording going on at the same time. But here we go. Okay, so Eclipse is starting up now. When we work on Eclipse, as you'll see in a minute, it gives us an editor for our Java program. It gives us some different project management features. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier on, one of the strengths of Java is that it's really good for working with large programs, right? So Python is great for those 5-minute programs that you write where you just want to get a job done quickly. But if you are building a more substantial application, then that's an area where Java is really strong. Eclipse has a lot of features for that kind of thing. I'm just going to create a quick Java project. Create a project, Java project. Okay, now there are downsides to Eclipse, I've got to say. I'm not necessarily a fan of big IDEs. They do tend to be a little bit slow. And sometimes they break in ways that are difficult to fix. But with Java, there's not really a choice about using an IDE. Trying to program Java with a normal text editor just isn't a feasible option. However, you definitely do want a text editor installed on your system, a plain text editor installed on your system for working with things like HTML files. Okay, so HTML files are as I'm sure you know, web pages and things like that. And you will certainly need a text editor for working with that kind of data. So if you don't already have a text editor on your system, then please install a good one. Okay, Linux comes with good text editors. On Linux, quite often I use gedit if I'm in a visual environment, or if I'm using a text-only environment, I use Nano. But if you are using Windows, then a really good text editor is Notepad++. Okay, that's a free text editor which you can download from the website. Please don't download it from one of those Softpedia type websites. So when you're searching for software for Windows, it quite often advertises software on these sites like CNET or Softpedia. And I remember a study came out a little while ago showing that an enormously high percentage of that software is infected with viruses. So if you want to get the software without so much risk of virus infection, then please just go straight to the website. I mean, you can't guarantee that the developer is trustworthy, but at least you're only trusting one person, whereas if you download it from Softpedia, you are trusting all of the people at Softpedia to check that the program is virus-free, and I'm sure that at least one of them either could have made a mistake or might just be acting maliciously. You never know. So yeah, Notepad++ is a really good text editor to download if you're on Windows. Now, if you're on Mac, it's a bit harder for me to make a suggestion because I don't know as much about Mac, and also a lot of the products on Mac seem to be quite expensive. The text editor that always used to be famous was BB Edit, but I do think that's getting a bit old. I'm not sure that that's necessarily the best option on Mac today. So I don't really know what the best editor is. You could have a look, maybe have a look on some websites for what they recommend for Mac users. As a Mac user, you probably are going to have to pay a little bit to get a really good editor, but as a Mac user, you must be used to paying for stuff anyway, so it can't be helped. Okay, so I knew I was going to make a dig at Mac users somewhere in this video. Okay, so going back to Eclipse, now don't worry too much about what I'm doing here. I'm just making a really simple Java program for the purposes of demonstration. Okay, so I've made a really simple Java program here. If I run the program, I should get a little message printing out at the bottom, hello world. Now, another really important thing to learn about in Eclipse is Git. Okay, so Git is some software which allows you to manage your programs. It gives you features like, for example, as you're developing your program, you can basically take a snapshot of where your program is at a particular moment in time. And then if you completely mess up your program, you can go back to that moment and undo all of the damage that you did by accident. That's super useful in all sorts of situations. Another big advantage of Git is that it allows you to share your program with other programmers, work on programs together. So it's a really valuable tool, and we do use that in IB quite a lot. It's not part of the IB qualification itself, so you won't be tested on it in the exam, but it is such a useful tool from a classroom perspective for me to share code with students and for students to share code with each other. So if you've installed a reasonably modern version of Eclipse, then Git should already be installed for you. All you've got to do is, when you have a project like this project that I just created, test, you right click on test and then you go to team and choose share project. Okay, now you need to make a repository. A repository basically is where it stores all of the different files that you have in your project. So I'll create a repository there. And then after creating the repository, all of the files that I've got, I can add them into my repository. So just right click, go to team and choose add to index. And then when I choose add to index, I get a little green plus symbol on the file. It shows me that Git is basically monitoring that file. And anytime I want to take a snapshot, I just go to, again, the team option and then choose commit. Now I'm not going to commit now because I have to go through a lot of different setup. Basically it's going to ask me for things like my email address. Don't worry, it won't send you spam email, but the reason it asks for your email address is because it needs to know who is editing the program. Remember that Git is for lots of programmers to work together, so the idea is that each programmer provides a little bit of information to say who they are, so that if you want to complain about what somebody has done to a program, then you know who to email. What I recommend, if during the course, the email address that you put in on Git will just be your school email address, and it won't get shared with anybody else unless you set up your own repository on GitHub. Okay, so GitHub is an internet site where you can share your Git repositories. Basically, it allows you to share your program code with people on the internet. It is free to set up a GitHub account, and if you want to give that a go, then then please do. But in that case, yes, I guess your internet would get out into the open. But certainly, I provide a GitHub account for students on the course, but I don't expect students to post to the GitHub account, so your address wouldn't be leaking out on the internet there. Okay, so what have I covered? I've covered Linux. I've covered installing IDEs for installing Java and then installing IDEs for Java and IDEs for Python. I've covered installing a proper text editor. I have covered using Git to manage your source code. I don't know that there's anything else which immediately occurs to me that is good to have on your computer. Okay, I guess one sort of final recommendation. So as part of the IB, you will probably be looking at least a little bit at some web development. So what I'm talking about here is creating maybe programs which are running a little bit within the browser. So on the IB course, we teach obviously Java, and a lot of the Java that we look at is targeted towards local applications. So it is somewhat relevant to the type of Java which people develop. For example, if they're writing mobile phone apps which are written in Java, well, at least for Android they're written in Java. But a lot of applications these days, obviously, they run across the internet. So if you're running applications across the internet, then actually you're going to be using a lot of HTML and JavaScript for what is called the front-end development. So that's the part of the program that runs in a user's browser. So it could be well worth thinking about how you are going to read and write, view and edit browser programs. Now, if you want to read and write browser programs, you're going to need JavaScript installed. JavaScript is another programming language. Now, there is actually an option on the IB for studying the web instead of studying Java, in which case you might be looking at some of those web languages like PHP or JavaScript, but as a school we haven't chosen that option. I always think that if PHP is an option, you should never choose it. But that doesn't mean that it's not useful to know JavaScript. JavaScript is a really, really common language, and I normally have at least a few students on the IB who, as well as maybe knowing Python or Java, they have learned a bit of JavaScript in their own time. Quite often, those students will want to use a bit of JavaScript in their internal assessment as well. So if you are interested in knowing a bit about JavaScript, well, the first thing is that you probably will want to install Node. So Node.js is the main JavaScript interpreter. So in this case, I've gone to the Node website. It's recommending me a Linux download, but I think probably if you go on your computer, it's going to recommend whatever download is appropriate for your computer. And this is a JavaScript programming language interpreter. So it will run JavaScript programs. Now, you actually don't need to install Node to run JavaScript programs if you just want to run JavaScript programs in your browser, right? So just using a text editor like Notepad++, you could write JavaScript programs, and then you can basically open them in your browser, so Firefox or Chrome, and run the program directly like that. But the JavaScript programs that you run in your browser are quite limited compared to JavaScript programs that you run in Node, and that's because obviously your browser runs JavaScript programs from all sorts of websites, and we have to be very careful about the security issues there. If we just ran program code from any old website, then people could do all sorts of nasty things to your computer. nobody would be dumb enough to allow people to run arbitrary programs from websites, except for Microsoft. Many years ago, they had something called ActiveX, but that is in the past now. We all realise that that was a terrible mistake. Okay, so this is really just something. If you're really hardcore, there's always a couple of students who really love going beyond the call of duty and really learning as much as possible. And if you're interested in web development, then firstly, I really want to support you on that. The IB course obviously doesn't focus so much on web development, but it is a really important aspect of software development these days. So much of the software world revolves around the web, and it's a very valuable skill to have. So if it's something that you want to pursue, then by all means install Node, learn a little bit of JavaScript, and if you want a bit of extra help or something, come and ask me. And sometimes students come and ask me stuff which I have no idea about, right? So, I mean, technology is always changing, so you might come and ask me, and I will say, I have just no clue what that is, but I probably will be very interested, and I probably will go away and find out about it and come back to you. So there's actually all sorts of things that I've learned, and the only reason I've learned them is because students have come to me and basically asked for help with something that I didn't know before. So it's a really good opportunity for me to find out some of the new stuff happening in the computer science world. Okay, so guys, that's it. I think that covers all of my recommendations. I hope that some of that software was interesting for you. And if you have any problems installing, then just let me know.